In today's video, we're taking a look at one of the best values in the subcompact crossover segment right now, and that is the Nissan Kicks. Now, we have looked at the Nissan Kicks back in 2019, but we're doing it again because there is so much new competition in this segment. The subcompact or small crossover segment, whatever you want to call it, is absolutely on fire in the US, and we have a ton of new models and a ton of refreshed models as well. There's a lot riding on the shoulders of the Kicks at the moment because this effectively replaced two different Nissan models. It effectively replaced the Nissan Versa hatch as well as the Nissan Juke. But into this segment, we have a ton of new and refreshed competition. We have an all-new Kia Soul, we have an all-new Hyundai Venue, which is really focused on low-end value, and then we have odd entries like the Mazda CX-30, which is really just a Mazda 3 that's been lifted up off the ground and had its price tag cut, so it will compete directly with certain versions of this. As a result, this video is going to be a little bit shorter than normal, and it's going to focus mainly on comparisons. Up front, we get a style that is, again, definitely less polarizing than the Juke, although there are still some flamboyant elements here, like these headlamps that really have a strong bulge to them. Not the biggest fan of that, because this is a little bit more quirky styled than something like the Rogue, but it still fits with the rest of the Nissan family. It has this strong chrome bar right here. Definitely looks like a mini-me version of the rest of Nissan's crossover lineup, and that's definitely a good thing, because Nissan's crossovers are certainly handsome. They're not crazy styled. Unlike Hyundai's Kona, the headlamps are exactly where you expect them to be, and even though some people may say this is a little bit too generic compared to the previous Juke, I think the style is pretty good. Nissan goes about active safety a little bit differently than the rest of the Japanese competition. So we do find radar adaptive cruise control standard or optional on some of the competitors in this segment. Nissan's going in a slightly different direction, and radar adaptive cruise control is not available at any price. But we do have features that we don't normally find in the competition, like an available 360-degree camera system. There's a camera right there in the Nissan logo. Nissan is also a big fan of features like blind spot warning with rear cross traffic detection and rear parking sensors, features which you may not find in the competitive brands at this price. With small crossover sales being absolutely on fire in America, everybody's piling on the bandwagon, and a lot of manufacturers have multiple entries in this segment. For instance, Hyundai and Kia are each fielding two different models, and they're not exactly just duplicate cookie-cutter versions of one another either. We also have a bunch of new small crossovers coming from Ford and General Motors, in addition to, for instance, the two different Jeeps that this might directly compete with, the Renegade and the Jeep Compass. The Compass is on the longer end of the scale, as is something like a Subaru Crosstrek or the Mazda CX-30. Now at the moment, Mazda's still selling the old CX-3, which is definitely on the small side, but the CX-30 is not too far off this in terms of interior space. But the odd thing about the CX-30 is that they really did just take a Mazda 3 and add some body cladding, jack it up a little bit, and alter the roofline a tiny touch and call it a crossover. And that's why it is on the large end of this segment, as is the Subaru Crosstrek, which is just a lifted Impreza hatchback. But the Kicks is not simply a lifted hatchback version of the Versa, although there is obviously some family resemblance. Moving completely around to the rear, you can see that the tail lamp modules mimic a little bit of the shape that was going on up front, and we have a very eccentrically shaped hatch, but this does not mean that the opening itself has that same eccentric shape there. It is more of a standard-sized hatch. Under this hood, we find just one engine on offer in America. It's a 1.6-liter four-cylinder engine. It produces 122 horsepower. Thanks to the continuously variable transmission, this gives you 33 miles per gallon out on the highway. And as we'll talk about a bit more in the drive section, as with many Nissans, the CVT does sap a little bit of the fun out of the vehicle, but it really gives us excellent fuel economy, and like many Nissans, this does end up beating its EPA estimate in the average driving cycle. If you want a bit more oomph, you won't find it under this hood. You'll have to upgrade to some of the larger Nissan crossovers. Front seat comfort is definitely good in the Kicks. Bear in mind that this vehicle's price tag is pretty narrow, and it's definitely at the lower end of this segment. So this ranges from about $19,000 on up to about $23,000 or so. Obviously, we'll talk about that more later, but we don't have a power seat in this model. It's actually not available in any trim of the Kicks, and this seat is not quite as adjustable as some of the competitions, and for that I am going to have to dock a few points, but I found the seat to be very comfortable for my 6-foot frame. The big deal here is that if you're shorter or taller than me, it may not be quite as comfortable. So I'm going to give this seat 9 out of 10 points. Again, 1 point deducted for the lack of adjustability. We do have a tilt telescopic steering column with a small range of motion as well. Hopping into the back, I have about an inch of headroom left, and the ceiling is pretty square, which is nice. It doesn't curve drastically towards the side, as we see in some really small vehicles in the US. I have about 4 inches of legroom left. Legroom is a little bit tighter in here than in some of the larger entries, but again, remember, we have a lot of segment busters here. We have things like the Jeep Compass, we have the new Kia Seltos, we have the Mazda CX-30. that are definitely on the large side for this group of small crossovers, and they have a lot more interior room because they're just bigger vehicles. The larger competitors are going to be a little bit wider across the back seat as well, so that means they're going to be a little bit more comfortable if you want to try and put 3 adults across the back, but headroom is still pretty generous back here in the Kicks. Scooting all the way over to the right side, my knees are touching but not digging into this seat back. It is all the way back in its tracks. Cargo practicality has long been a hallmark of the Nissan brand, and that continues with the Kicks. We have one of the larger cargo areas back here, even though we do have this raked hatch. When you take a look at the numbers, it appears that Nissan has perhaps prioritized cargo capacity a little bit over legroom in the back. And that's how we have slightly less legroom than something like a Kia Soul, but also a little bit more cargo room despite not having a really vertical hatch. You can see this 22-inch roller bag has absolutely no problem fitting right back there and can even fit right there under this hard cargo cover. The cargo area is definitely one of the reasons that you might want to look at the Kicks instead of something like a Nissan Versa, because the Versa is a sedan only now, and it definitely has less cargo room than we find here, about half the room that we find in the Kicks. Peeking under the load floor, we find the jack right there and the tow hook, and then an itty-bitty compact spare tire, but there's certainly enough room in here to put a full-size spare tire if you wanted to do that yourself aftermarket. The rear seats fold in a 60-40 fashion, but you'll notice that they don't fold completely flat with the cargo area back there. That's because Nissan really decided to maximize the depth of the cargo well. There's a nice touch right over here where we have some grocery bag holders, one on each side. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in essentially the top-end trim. We don't have a moonroof right there over the driver and front passengers' heads. That really helps out when it comes to effective headroom. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts. The model that we're driving has this contrasting orange stitching right there on the black leather upholstery. As you'd expect in an inexpensive vehicle, the front doors are made from mainly hard plastics. These are going to be a little bit longer wearing than soft touch materials, but they're not going to feel quite as premium. We do have a soft armrest over here, however. At the bottom of the door, we have a large bottle holder and some extra storage there. Then moving over to the dashboard, in this trim, we do have an unexpected touch, which is a soft touch material right here on the dashboard. Harder plastics are found on top, but this has the same stitching going on the seats. We find a pretty large bin-style glove compartment for a small vehicle. I was just barely able to fit a large tablet computer inside one of the 10-inch iPads. Moving over to the center of the dashboard, we have 2 air vents right there in the middle. Basically the same infotainment system that we find in the Nissan Versa. This does have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration. And if I press this camera button there, you'll notice that we do have the Nissan 360-degree camera system. This is pretty rare to find in a really small vehicle like the Nissan Kicks, but it definitely makes parking an awful lot easier if you live in a tight city environment. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit easy to park as a commuter vehicle, this may be a good option for you. Below that, we have the single-zone automatic climate control, heated seats in this particular model. Single USB input, 12-volt power port right there. This is just a storage area. There's no wireless charging mat down there or anything like that. This model has keyless go right over here, which means that we do get a blank right over here on the steering column. Now, fortunately, they didn't just stick a plug in here. The area is just not cut out, but it still has the shape that you'd find in the model with the key. This has a pretty typical console shifter here. This is the sport mode button, this one with the little dash right there, and then there's a low mode right down there at the bottom. Between the front seats, we have a traditional handbrake, 2 large cup holders, and they're nice and low, so you won't really be bopping them too easily when you're using this armrest right here. The armrest is skewed towards the driver's side. It has a really teeny tiny little button there to open it up, and then inside we find a change holder and then a little bit of storage space. A really nice touch on the driver's side is that we have a surprisingly large color LCD for such an inexpensive vehicle. If you recall our recent video on the Hyundai Venue, it has a very small monochromatic display rather than a bigger display like we find here. This is where you can access certain vehicle settings, you can get a digital tachometer right there, you can also get infotainment readouts, status of the vehicle's active safety systems, fuel economy, digital speedometer, etc. Moving out from there, we find one of Nissan's flat bottom steering wheels. This is the same one that we find in a wide variety of different Nissan vehicles. We have sport grips right there, that flat bottom. And then on the left side of the steering wheel, we find some infotainment controls, volume up, down, track forward, backward, the buttons that control that multifunction LCD. On the right side, we have the buttons for the standard cruise control here, not radar adaptive cruise control. If we did have radar adaptive cruise control, there'd be some extra buttons there that we see in other Nissan vehicles. I'm a little bit sad that we don't have that feature in the Kicks because this does have some of the hardware required for that feature. It just doesn't have everything. In our 0 to 60 acceleration tests, highway speeds happen eventually. 9.7 seconds really isn't too bad for a small crossover like this, but obviously this is going to be slower than something like a RAV4 or a CR-V or Nissan's Rogue. Those are generally in the 7 to 8 second range. However, there are a decent number of other small crossovers out there that have a bit more power than this, but won't necessarily get you 0 to 60 faster than this. However, something like the Mazda CX-30 or the new turbocharged version of the Kia Seltos or the Hyundai Kona, those will definitely go 0 to 60 a bit faster. But there are also some slower models. For instance, the Ford EcoSport is particularly sluggish in this segment. As I've said before, I don't have a problem at all with CVTs in small, inexpensive vehicles like this because they really help bring the most out of a small engine like this. We have just 122 horsepower under the hood, and in the 0 to 60 run, this CVT will operate just like a traditional CVT, where it just hangs out at a high ratio, just as you heard in that acceleration run up the hill. However, once you're underway, if I floor it here again, we don't have a definite shift like we find in a traditional automatic transmission or in some CVTs. And then this CVT will try and imitate shifts. And that does mean that passing maneuvers may feel a little bit more sluggish than some of the snappier CVTs in this segment, most specifically the new Hyundai Kia CVT that we find in the Seltos. Thanks to the light curb weight, the Kicks stops pretty quickly, just 125 feet from 60 miles an hour back to 0. That's a pretty respectable time in this segment. The light curb weight also helps the handling ability of the Kicks. I'm going to give this a B+ when it comes to the handling score, but keep in mind that that's as compared to a wider variety of subcompact crossovers. If I were specifically going to limit this to subcompact crossovers that had a price tag of $18,000 to $23,000, the Kicks would likely be getting an A or an A+. This handles very well for a vehicle this price. Now, when you start pushing this harder in the corners, the first thing you're going to notice is the engine. Obviously, you're going to get a lot of engine noise in the cabin. It sounds sort of like a throaty Cuisinart. But the other thing that you're going to notice is that the Kicks does a really great job of keeping everything neat and tidy in the corners. We obviously get a little bit of push into the corners, just as you'd expect out of a front-wheel drive vehicle, but the suspension does not become upset in the corners over broken pavement, and that's something that some of the less expensive entries in this segment sometimes can. Even something like the Mazda CX-30 can get a little bit upset in the back over broken pavement. That's due to the suspension design that we see in that CX-30, but oddly enough, the Nissan Kicks is a little bit more polished, and I hadn't expected that. Now, obviously, it's going to be a little bit harder to attain those speeds in the Kicks because we have a lot less power in this than we find in that CX-30. As with many small crossovers, the Kicks can have a little bit of that bobble-headed feel that you get in vehicles with short wheelbases. It's just the way short wheelbase vehicles are. However, we definitely get a little bit less of that in the Kicks than we do in the really small entries in the subcompact segment, but a little bit more than in something like the new longer Chevy Trailblazer. The Trailblazer and the stretched Encore are at the longer end of this segment, along with something like that Jeep Compass, and they're generally going to give you a slightly softer ride. One thing that surprised me when Nissan launched the Kicks is that they decided to make the suspension a little bit firmer than I had expected, and that's why our ride score remains a B-. Remember that ride and handling are frequently two ends of the teeter-totter, and with the Kicks, Nissan certainly decided to focus on the handling ability. We also have a little bit less sound deadening than some of the competition. We got 73 decibels in here at 50 miles an hour, but inexpensive crossovers generally tend to be louder than the next category up, compact crossovers like a RAV4 or CR-V, so that still nets the Kicks a B+ when it comes to the cabin noise score. When it comes to fuel economy, the Kicks is definitely impressive. High fuel economy is something that we've come to expect from Nissan in their inexpensive vehicles, and the Kicks certainly doesn't disappoint. I've been averaging 36.7 mpg over a week of mixed driving. Bear in mind that my daily commute goes up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass as well, and this vehicle is EPA rated for 33 miles per gallon. Obviously, part of that is because the engine does not create as much power as some of those less fuel-efficient alternatives, but also the CVT is really helping us out here. Not everybody is a huge fan of CVTs, of course. Nissan has had some issues with CVTs in the past in terms of reliability. We don't know exactly whether those CVT issues are behind them or not, but more recent versions of Nissan product line don't seem to be having those same issues in short-term reliability metrics. And the obvious benefit to a CVT is fuel economy, and the secondary benefit really is acceleration, as I mentioned earlier. Out on the road, the Kicks is a surprising amount of fun. If I were simply talking about driving dynamics, I would rather have the Kicks, honestly, than a front-wheel drive Honda HR-V. The HR-V just isn't quite as much fun as this. Let's say this compares relatively well to something like the Toyota CHR. The CHR will get a little bit better grip because it does have wider tires than we find in this model, but it really isn't going to get you 0 to 60 that much faster than this, unfortunately. It also won't have some of the nice touches that we find inside. Not strictly part of the drive section, but you'll notice on camera one of the features that I do like about the Kicks, and it's this personal surround sound system. This is not a terribly expensive option, but I love the fact that Nissan decided to put it in this, and I hope it makes its way into other inexpensive Nissan vehicles. Most folks out there spend a lot of time driving solo in their cars, and this saves the expense of giving all the processing power and all the speakers that would be required for a traditional surround sound system, and it just pops right there in the headrest. Conceptually, this is pretty similar to what Infiniti has put in some of their vehicles in the past. It helps reduce cost because in this vehicle, it has it just in the driver's seat, not in the passenger seat as well, like we find in the Infiniti line. Bottom lining the Kicks out on the road is pretty easy. This is a surprisingly competent little hatchback. Whether you want to call this a hatchback or a crossover, I'll leave that up to you. But the one drawback, obviously, that we haven't talked about yet is the lack of all-wheel drive. No all-wheel drive system offered in any version of the Nissan Kicks that help keep the price tag low and the fuel economy high. But obviously, if you want all-wheel drive in your small crossover, you're going to have to cross this off your shopping list. The important thing to remember about the Kicks is that it is filling a very specific niche. There once was a time where manufacturers would give us discount trims of more mainline vehicles, have fewer models in general, but have lower end trims of those models, and that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Now manufacturers are going after specific segments with targeted vehicles, like the Nissan Kicks and of course the Hyundai Venue, which is very much like it. Even though Nissan and Hyundai, talking about two different companies here, have a ton of different crossover models. You should also remember that in the US at least, the Kicks replaces the Juke and of course the Versa Note. But as I said before, if you want all-wheel drive, you'll have to step up the Nissan ladder into an entirely different vehicle. But that lack of all-wheel drive has helped Nissan keep the price tag very narrow. It starts at $18,870. That gets you the base S trim with a 7-inch touchscreen infotainment system, steel wheels, automatic emergency braking, and importantly, rear auto braking as well, which is a really nice touch, especially if you live in the city. The next trim level up is $20,500. That gets you the LCD instrument cluster that we were looking at today. And importantly, this is the trim where you get Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. So if you want those two key features, you're going to have to look at the SV trim and above. SR is where we get the LED headlamps, the 360-degree camera system, the leather steering wheel, and the imitation leather upholstery that we were driving today. That also has the option of the $1,000 premium package, which gives you the Bose personal surround system. One of the best ideas, I have to say, in a compact, inexpensive vehicle in America. I really wish this particular option would migrate its way into pretty much every Nissan product out there and other inexpensive vehicles. Because think about it, you're driving most of the time alone, so why do you need an expensive surround sound system in the vehicle that uses more speakers all the way around the cabin when you could just stick a different headrest to the vehicle, give the driver surround sound, and then retain a pretty normal listening experience for the rest of the people in the car? But the bottom line here is that even if you opt for all of the options available on your Kicks, it's going to top out just under $23,000 before destination. So definitely a much narrower price window than pretty much every other subcompact crossover, with just a very few exceptions. And that's why we're not going to be talking about the top sellers in this segment necessarily, like the Jeep Compass or the Chevy Trax, or really the Honda HR-V in any great detail, the Hyundai Kona, etc., because they have a much broader appeal. They're trying to go after a different shopper. They do have some entry-level focused trims, but the vast majority of those options will get much more expensive than the Kicks. And that's why our first, and I think most direct competitor really for the 2020 model year is the all-new Hyundai Venue. It's going after a very similar customer. It has a very narrow price range. It's front-wheel drive only. It starts a little bit less expensive, but that's primarily because it has a manual transmission. If you equip it with the automatic transmission, then the price range is pretty similar to the Kicks. In terms of MSRP, the Venue may be a little bit more expensive, but it seems that the Kicks is getting bigger discounts on the dealer lot, so comparably equipped, they're likely going to be pretty even. The Kicks, interestingly enough, comes across as the more polished option, and that isn't something I necessarily expected of it when I first drove the Kicks, because I was expecting it to be more of a Nissan Versa Note that had been elevated a bit. I didn't expect it to be as refined as the Kicks really is. That's noticeable on the inside, where we get that large color LCD instrument cluster, something that you generally don't find under $20,000. And compared to something like the Venue's instrument cluster, it is definitely snazzier. The Venue has a really tiny little monochromatic display. But on the other hand, the Venue has a little bit more traditional styling, a better predicted reliability rating according to most metrics out there, and it has a longer standard warranty, something that could be very important to someone that's spending only about $20,000 on their first new car. A good way to look at this is that adding a 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty to your Nissan Kicks when you're buying it at the dealer could add $1,000 to your total price tag, and that would definitely make it more expensive than the Hyundai Venue. But on the other hand, I think the Kicks is a little bit more fun to drive. We're not going to spend too much time on our next competitor, the Honda HR-V, because the HR-V, like the Compass, the Trax, etc., has a much broader price range and therefore a broader appeal, really. In fact, there are only 2 trims of the HR-V that are even within the price range of the Nissan Kicks before we start talking about the greater discount that you'll find on the Nissan dealer lot. The base trim starts just under $21,000, and the Sport trim is where you're going to find Apple CarPlay and Android Auto and a few of the other features that we do find on mainline trims of the Kicks, and that will be $22,520. So it's notably more expensive. Now, on the other hand, the HR-V, like some of the other options in this segment, offers all-wheel drive. That's going to be one of the big differences. So if you're looking at a vehicle that is this price and this size with all-wheel drive, it is possible to get that in some of the competition, but remember, you're going to be trading an awful lot of feature functionality. That price difference is very important to keep in mind. I think the HR-V is very practical. We have some of the more advanced safety features that we find in the rest of the Honda lineup available in the HR-V, but not standard. And of course, we have all-wheel drive available as well. But all of that's going to cost you. And if you get carried away with options, you could be 15–20% more expensive than the Nissan Kicks that we were driving. Next up, we have the subcompact vehicle that has long been the value leader in America, the Kia Soul. It has been completely redesigned relatively recently, but in this generation, sales have finally dipped below 100,000 units for the first time in a long time. It used to be that the Soul was the best-selling subcompact thing in America, whether you wanted to call it a hatchback or you wanted to call it a crossover. But sales have been sliding a bit lately because there's so many other subcompact crossovers available in America, and Kia is still not giving us all-wheel drive in the Soul, very similar to what we see in the Kicks. That helps improve the Soul's value, but it does mean that if you want all-wheel drive, you'll have to go somewhere else. And that somewhere else could be within the Kia lineup, because they now have the almost identically sized Kia Seltos, which is a bit more traditionally SUV styled, but has all-wheel drive standard. And of course, we have their hybrid hatchback, the Niro. So part of the reason Soul sales have been slipping in America is because there are other Kia options to choose from that are similarly priced and quite practical as well. Now, the important thing to remember about the Soul is that it goes from mild to wild. So you can get the Soul with a 200 horsepower 1.6-liter turbocharged engine and dual clutch transmission, or you could get the basic Soul with the manual transmission and the 2-liter engine. Like the Nissan Kicks, the Soul has a very strong focus on value at the bottom end of the food chain here. Its base price is $17,490, and you get a manual transmission. But if you add the automatic transmission, it ends up being pretty similar to the Kicks base MSRP with very similar feature content. It's very obvious that Kia has a laser focus on the value side of this segment, because within the price range of the Nissan Kicks, where Nissan has just 2 trim levels, the Soul has 5. And if you compare the top-end Kicks SR to the comparably priced Kia Soul, and that would be the Soul EX, you'll notice that Kia is really digging down on the value here. So they have a bigger touchscreen infotainment system, 10.25 inches. It's one of the largest infotainment systems you'll find in a small car. And we get some of the active safety technologies that we see in the rest of Kia's lineup on the Soul, but not necessarily within this price range. So it's somewhat similar. We have the autonomous emergency braking and lane keeping rather than just lane warning, but you do have to give up LED headlamps in that top-end trim and the 360-degree camera system that we find in the Nissan. Adding some of the features that we find on that top-end version of the Kicks to the Soul EX will set you back about $1,500 more than the Nissan. But remember that the Kia is going to give you a longer standard warranty, and we're going to get a few features that we don't find in the Nissan, like the lane keeping assistance, the driver attention monitoring, and of course we have that larger touchscreen infotainment system. The Soul is also one of the few options in this segment that can compete with the Kicks when it comes to handling, suspension refinement, cargo room, and interior practicality. Next up, we have the Toyota CHR. The CHR has always been a surprisingly good value in this segment. Now, admittedly, it is going to be more expensive than we find the Kicks typically, but there have been some pretty aggressive deals on the Toyota dealer lot. Now, if you're paying MSRP, it is going to be spendier. It's going to set you back $21,295, but uncharacteristically for Toyota, the price range is really narrow. It only goes up to about $26,350. And judging by local dealer sales in my region of the country, here in the San Francisco Bay Area, you should expect to get between $1,500 and $2,000 off your CHR. That's a surprising discount because in some of the dealers that we've surveyed here regionally, the discounts are actually a little bit more extreme on the CHR than they are on the Nissan Kicks. The CHR recently got a bit of a refresh, so it now supports smartphone integration, and it has a bunch of Toyota's active safety technologies on it as well. That makes the CHR a really good value, but you have to be willing to pay a little bit more for it than the Kicks. Bottom lining this segment is a little bit tricky because there are honestly some really great values. I think it would be very hard to go wrong with the CHR if you want to spend a little bit more money. The Kia Soul is obviously a very strong contender, as is the new Hyundai Venue, as long as your price range is very narrow. and the Nissan Kicks as well. I think these are three absolutely great options. If I were shopping in this segment, I suspect I might gravitate towards the Kia Soul for its longer warranty and its boxy styling. I think I like that style a little bit better. But there are also some really great reasons to buy the Nissan Kicks. I love the front seat comfort. It is exceptional in this segment. And we have that Bose personal surround sound system and that large LCD instrument cluster, which I think is a really nice touch. Be sure and let me know in the comment section what you would pick if you were shopping, and keep in mind that we're talking about folks out there that are shopping between about $18,000 and $22,000. That's about the extent of the budget. What would be your top pick down here at the smaller end of the subcompact crossover segment? Would you get a Soul? Would you get a Kicks? Would you be enticed by something like the Hyundai Venue in its denim trim, which I think is a really attractive option as far as interior design goes? Let me know all that down there in the comment section below, and I'll see all of you later.